Well, welcome back. Our readings this week are another invitation to listen to the Lord and to walk in His ways. So please take a few moments to review the readings for the fourth Sunday in Ordinary Time, and then join me here. Our first reading is from Deuteronomy 18, and it predicts one like Moses will come, and that we should listen to him, because God will put His own words in the mouth of this one like Moses. Now, on one level, this is fulfilled by Joshua, who is truly one like Moses, his own successor. It is Joshua who will lead God's people into the promised land following the death of Moses. But Jews also saw this verse as a messianic prophecy. And of course, Christians see it fulfilled in the person of Jesus Christ. After all, Jesus' name is derived from the name Joshua or Yeshua. So it's not accidental that when Moses returns to the earth at the transfiguration of Jesus, we hear the language of Deuteronomy 18 echoed again. In fact, in all three of the synoptic gospels, they tell us that the Father not only declares Jesus his Son at the transfiguration, but commands the disciples to listen to him. Now, Moses was granted the grace then to see his own divine successor. Now, listening to Jesus is a daily commitment. Maybe that's why this particular psalm for the week, Psalm 95, is our responsorial psalm. It's also called the invitatory psalm, and it's part of the prayers that begin every day for those who pray the Liturgy of the Hours. That practice of praying Psalm 95 at the beginning of every day goes back at least to the 500s because it's mentioned by St. Benedict in his rule. Now, why do we recite this psalm, which recalls one of Israel's low points when they refused to listen to Moses in the wilderness and lost the privilege to enter the promised land with Joshua? Because listening is a matter of spiritual life and death. There are paths that lead to life, and there are paths that lead to destruction. And a wise person listens to the guidance that is given them, a guidance to walk in a particular way. And Psalm 95's language also points to one of the places that we can really listen. And that's when we are worshiping, when we are in prayer. In a word, when we are in the highest form of worship and prayer, in the Mass. This is where we, as the psalm goes on to proclaim, sing joyfully to the Lord. This is where we come into His presence with thanksgiving. The Mass is where we bow down and worship, bending the knee, literally, when we genuflect before the Lord who made us. This is the place where we hear His voice in the Scriptures and in the prayers of the Mass. And that's the one repeated imperative we hear in this psalm. If you hear His voice in word and sacrament, harden not your hearts. Because truly the heart of the matter is a matter of the heart. To hear the Lord, to listen to Him, is to trust the Lord with your whole heart. The greatest prayer for the Jewish people is called the Shema. It's also from Deuteronomy, where we take our first reading. Shema Israel Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hear or listen, Israel, the Lord is God, and the Lord is one. And you shall do what? You shall love the Lord with all your heart and all your soul and with all your might. And these words, he goes on to say, that I command you today must always be on your heart. It's part of what St. Paul is emphasizing in the second reading this week from 1 Corinthians, that whatever your vocation is, maybe it's married life, maybe it's a celibate vocation for the kingdom, but always live in such a way that we can most fully love and listen to the Lord. Now in the gospel, we have Jesus' first miracle. If you've been listening to our series, Glories of the Gospel, you know that Mark is presenting Jesus as a kind of action hero. He's in a battle with what St. Paul calls the god of this world, the devil, to take back this world for his Father through the powerful advancement of the kingdom of God. So Mark has a very specific way of presenting Jesus. So it shouldn't surprise us that in Mark's gospel, Jesus' first miracle isn't a healing, It's an exorcism. So the scene is set for us in this week's gospel in Capernaum, the place Jesus chose as his base of operation. He's on his home turf. He lived in Peter's home there. And as Jesus was teaching one day, it says the people who listened were astonished because Jesus taught with authority. And now they will see that authority matched with power. In fact, in Mark's gospel, he'll use those two terms, power and authority, nearly 24 times in the gospel. And so the crowd brings to Jesus a possessed man, and Jesus immediately sets him free. And the crowd cries out, "What is this? A new teaching with authority." This Jesus commands even the unclean spirits. And what do? They obey him. And that's because obedience has its root in listening. In fact, remember that Hebrew prayer I just mentioned, the Shema Israel, hear Israel, or listen Israel. That's also the Hebrew word, Shema, for obedience. You see, the mark that we've really heard the Lord, that we've really listened to Jesus, that we haven't so hardened our hearts that we can't hear him, is that we obey him. It's what St. Paul in Romans, in both the first chapter and the last chapter, first chapter of Romans and the 16th chapter, St. Paul calls it the obedience of faith. And in this narrative from Mark's gospel, even the demons listened and obeyed the words of Jesus. Now, like those who followed Joshua, a type or shadow of Jesus, into the promised land, we too must follow Jesus. We too must listen to him, because Jesus shows us the way to go. In fact, he even said of himself, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." And that following the way of Jesus by listening to him is actually the core message of the Gospel of Mark. We'll see it all year long as we study this Gospel. We'll hear it again and again. And the literary center of this Gospel of Mark is a section we call the Way of Discipleship. It's Mark 8:22 through Mark 11:11. It's the way that leads to the cross. It's an invitation to truly die to ourselves. It's a path that keeps our hearts supple to the Lord's instructions. It's a way of self-giving love where our heart is united with Jesus' sacred heart. And so all of these readings today are an invitation to really listen to the Lord, to keep our heart supple and soft, that when he gives us instructions, when he points the way, we'll respond with obedient faith and love. May that be our daily intention. May we wake up every day saying, "Lord, today I want to hear your voice. Give me the grace that I will not harden my heart against your command, that I will truly hear and obey."